Welcome to the end of the world, survivors. You are tuned into this station, one of the last voices on the airwaves. I'm Harper, broadcasting from a radio station that somehow still hums with life. I am no longer alone, and my friends and I are looking for the author of Robert's Rules of Chaos while we rebuild and forge new alliances. This is where we build our society. There is no going back. But as we forge forward, creating a new world order, I'll share stories of your fellow survivors and how the Robert's Rules of Chaos have helped them survive, or at least given them some goalposts to focus on. I'll be your guide through the madness, sharing the locations of safe havens, theories, and information about our new world, and the occasional existential crisis that comes with a zompocalypse. The world's gone dark, the dead outnumber the living, but we are surviving and rebuilding. The old world is gone, but we are adapting to surviving in this new world and the new rules that come with surviving the zombie menace. Stick around if you're still alive. Welcome, survivors, to Zombie Apocalypse Survivor Radio. I am happy to be here. I am DJ Harper, and we have gotten so many people writing in, radioing in, and telling us their stories. And I don't know if you remember me talking about when I got to the radio station way back a while ago, that there was a printer here, but all of the toner had been used up and most of the paper. Well, it turns out that whoever was here before me, Robert of Robert's Rules of Chaos, if the notebook I found is anything to go by, printed off a bunch of copies of Robert's Rules of Chaos and has basically gone Johnny Appleseed. We have basically heard from as far as Felina's Gold, Nevada, as far as going west goes. Still haven't heard from anybody in California, but we are still hopeful that there are still some survivors there. But as far west as Felina's Gold, as far east as North Carolina, and as far south as Oklahoma, that Robert's Rules has traveled. And one of the things that Malcolm and Liam would like to do is they would like to find Robert. They'd like to make sure he's okay. He has shaped our apocalyptic world with these rules because so many people are following them. One of the rules about clearing a house is leave the front door unlocked, but mark whether there's zombies inside or outside. And the number of people this has saved in a pinch, I can't even count. Because that is something we've heard over and over again is thank God the door was marked. Thank God we were able to just go inside because it was marked as clear and the door was unlocked. Always make sure there's enough for someone to have a last meal has saved a lot of people from hunger and starvation. You go into a house and there's usually at least a couple canned goods, if not, some very old and stale ramen, so Robert's Rules have definitely shaped our apocalyptic world, and they want to find Robert. They want to make sure Robert's okay. If his name's even Robert, it's obviously a play off of Robert's Rules, the meeting handbook, that you follow to have a meeting that makes any sense. Anyway, Robert's Rules of Law versus Robert's Rules of Chaos. So if you're out there, Robert, you're listening to us, send up a flare of some sort. Send somebody who's traveling a note. We're doing a lot of relay information where people travel a little bit and give a note to somebody who's traveling a little bit, who gives a note to somebody who's traveling a little bit. And that relayed information is getting to us and pretty damn helpful. So if you're out there, Robert, try to drop us a line. Let us know that you're okay. And there are many, many, many communities that would welcome you with open arms. So if you're out there, let us know. On to the first rule of Robert's Rules of Chaos. And some of the rules that are out there are just the rules themselves. A lot of people have a copy of the first rule where it says, we are all in this together. And that's it. Or it says, we are all in this together. We meet strangers with an open hand because we are all in this together, and with a gun in case the strangers do not know it yet. But having had access to his notebook, I have the longer rule. And there are a lot of people who have like a longer printout of the rules, but it's like he printed out the long version and then printed out a bunch more copies of the shortened version, probably because, you could make a lot more pages of that. But the rule in its entirety is, we're all in this together. Humanity is up against an inhuman foe that outmatches us, one that has wiped us almost to extinction. Worse, in the early days, we helped them with the task of our own removal by fighting amongst ourselves with indecision and infighting. Either these forms of self-defeat are over, now, immediately, or humanity is over, because we're up against an enemy that never fights amongst themselves, never competes against their own kind to the detriment of their group. We're against an enemy so united in their purpose that they may as well be different fingers on the same dark hand, and humanity needs to match that unity. Every human is your ally. Every human needs your help and protection. Every human needs to help and protect you, or we all die. This does not mean that we need to be foolish. There will be some humans who don't get this message, who reject it, and we need to be wary. We meet strangers with an open hand because we are all in this together, and with a gun in case the strangers do not know it yet. And you know from my own stories that there have been quite a few strangers that we have had to deal with violently. And that is always unfortunate, and it's never something we relish or are happy about. But we're not going to let zombies kill us, and we're not going to let other humans kill us just because they don't know that we're willing to share, or just because they're not willing to share. So that is the very first rule, and the reason I am introducing this rule right now is we got a letter where somebody was talking about how if they had heard this rule earlier, it might have helped them. But what they said is a very, very condensed version of their early days tale. They were with a group of people, a group of friends that had been friends since grade school, and they all thought that, you'd be friends forever. They were in their mid-20s when the zombie menace happened, and they decided to survive together, and they were in a safe location, the six of them. They were sharing food. They had all brought food together. And it was their leader, DJ, and his wife, Faith, who said they should all pool resources and stick together and, kind of build a community. They built up barricades together, and the person who wrote in basically did not share their name, but shared everybody else's name and said that, when they arrived at the location, everybody had brought a tremendous amount of food except for DJ and Faith, who had excuses as to why they could not bring the food from their own home. And they accepted it because they were friends and everyone else had brought enough food that it didn't seem to matter. But as time wore on, it seemed that DJ would have all of these great ideas for what everybody could do, and then everybody would do it while DJ did nothing. And it was starting to grate on people's nerves, but since his ideas were good and they were all friends, they let it go. Over and over and over again. Well, once food and eventually water started running short on supply, the infighting started. People started blaming each other for the shortness of food. The fact that DJ and his wife Faith hadn't brought any food made everybody angry. Um, it wasn't a big deal when there was plenty, but once things became challenging, it became a pretty big deal. It became a sore spot. And this group fell to infighting because, being hangry is a real problem in our apocalyptic world. And especially in the early days, as there were supply chain breakdowns, as we started to realize we're never getting back to normal and things are just going to get worse and worse from here. It took a while for people to accept that. It took a while for people to recognize no one's coming to save you. No one's coming to help us, because everybody fell. The world as we knew it stopped existing. So as they fell to infighting, they kept having to make more and more supply runs. And as you all know, especially in the early days, fast zombies were everywhere because people were consistently being turned. So the supply runs were really pretty dangerous. And our our correspondent here, uh, she and her husband Tom went on a supply run, and everybody was supposed to be getting supplies. Um, there were 3 teams of 2. Everybody was supposed to be getting supplies, and they were getting supplies at a grocery store, and out of nowhere, just 7 or 8 zombies. One minute they're filling their bags with the lightest possible foods they can find, because canned foods are great, but they're heavy. And the next they are running for their life. And when you have 7 or 8 zombies, the Z fear kicks in. So they almost didn't make it out. They stood there for a few seconds, but the zombies seemed a little surprised too and stood there for a second or two before they rushed at them. Luckily, it was a pretty sizable grocery store, and the distance between them and the zombies was great enough that they were able to outrun them, shut the doors behind them, and kind of block them. But, they booked it after that because the doors were glass, and I think we all know zombies just don't feel pain. They don't notice when they are being damaged, and they will pound a glass door until that door is no longer standing. And so they made it back barely. They didn't even think about the fact that they were still hanging onto the bags as they ran. A lot of times when Z fear kicks in, if you can get your legs moving, your brain doesn't catch up for a little while. And they probably could have moved faster if they didn't have the bags, but they were glad to have the food because Heather and Mike, the other team, they were sent for water and medical supplies. They went to a drugstore for both, because this particular drugstore apparently had a lot of bottled water, a lot of distilled water. They came back with supplies. DJ and Faith didn't get a damn thing, which caused a huge, huge fight. And the type of fight where they are screaming and yelling at each other, and it almost came to blows. Um, and DJ basically told them, I come up with all of the ideas. You guys are supposed to get the supplies, which was not a deal that anybody had made, which was not something anyone had decided to do. And DJ actually said, "Do you expect me to risk my life for you?" Which apparently, Heather and Mike was another couple there. Mike had to be physically restrained from probably violently ending DJ's life. They got everybody calmed down. Our correspondent said, she tried to play peacekeeper, can't talk today, and tried to get everybody to calm down. And after a while, DJ and Faith started doing supply runs, because the rest of them stopped sharing You know, our correspondent, Tom, Heather, Mike, would share their supplies with each other, but stopped sharing them with DJ and Faith because the only people that got supplies were those who participated in gathering them, which makes a lot of sense when you have a near-death experience just gathering the supplies. And so once DJ and Faith started working with everybody and started bringing in supplies and all of that. Hi. As you know, the radio station here is filled with cats. So we have a cat in front of the microphone at this point. Everybody say hello to Shadow. Shadow couldn't let us record without saying hi to everybody. Um, they started getting along again because really the main point of contention was this couple was not pulling their weight. And so once they started pulling their weight, things calmed down, and there was still fighting here or there. There were still petty squabbles here or there. Because, you know, in a lot of places, you're having to ration the food, you're having to ration the water. And those are not easy things to do because people are hungry, people are thirsty, and different people require a different amount of those supplies. You know, some people have very high metabolisms and just require more food. Some people just need to drink a lot of water. I know that from personal experience here. Your DJ Harper is thirsty all of the time, and if I'm not drinking a ton of water, I get headaches, I get lethargic, I get stupid. Um, so, you know, part of the reason I am so focused on gathering water and gathering supplies is I drink a gallon to a gallon and a half of water a day. And if I cut that down to a cup or two a day, I am not functional or rational or pleasant to be around. And so that is why we have a lot of different ways of collecting water. That's why we have more than one cistern. That is why we have set up different mechanisms on the roof to catch rainwater into rain barrels. You know, not just for me, but for the horses and for the entire population here. So we don't ration our water here at the station because we don't have to, because we have put probably hundreds of man hours into water collection and building systems so we have potable water at all times. But you know, in the early days, people weren't rebuilding, they were just surviving because we all thought that we would have somebody coming to help, that the government would eventually get their shit together. Pardon the language, pardon that slip up, would get their stuff together and get the zombies under control and things would go back to normal. You know, the water treatment plants would work again. Electricity would work again. And as we have found, that never happened. And so they started realizing they would need to have a longer term solution. And DJ talked about this place that he knew that was built by um, his prepper aunt and uncle. Um, they had a cabin. It had rain barrels. It had a cistern. It had a few solar panels. It had a wood stove for the winter, you know, and he made this place to seem pretty idyllic. It even had a fairly sizable pond that the property was on. They called it the lake house, but it was a lake cabin, you know, no air conditioning, but heat, that kind of, you know, think rustic. And so DJ started working very, very hard to convince everybody, hey, let's go here. Let's go here. And nobody wanted to leave where they were. They were safe where they were. They had to ration the food. They had to ration the water. You know, supply runs, they were having to move further and further out, as we have all experienced. But they had a pretty safe setup, you know, boarded windows. They had very secure doors. They had a second floor. And, as we all know, a lot of zombies cannot figure out stairs to save their life. Like, stairs are just a little too complex. So being on the second floor, they had escape routes, like they'd been here long enough to really build the place up. So they didn't want to go. They didn't want to go. And this place was pretty far. But they were still early on enough in the zompocalypse that gasoline hadn't gone bad. Gasoline could still be used. So they eventually were convinced. They gassed up one vehicle, crammed as many supplies in it as they could. And that was not an easy process, You could load up the car for a little bit, and then you had to hide inside and wait for the zombies to disperse. And zombies can stalk an area out for 2 hours to 3 days. And it really just kind of depends on how the zombie's feeling, if there's a distraction, that sort of thing. So they started creating different distractions for the zombies to be focused someplace else. While this house that they were in was very well fortified, it was also in a neighborhood. And so, a lot of neighbors weren't so lucky in their surviving and then tried to eat them, because that is what zombies do. So they are throwing distractions out the back window. So the zombies gather in the backyard while they are loading up a vehicle in the front yard, and they're trying to get as many supplies as they possibly can. So they eventually get everything loaded up, including backup gas cans, which took a good week or two to scour and find. And, a little ingenuity at some gas stations to get some gas, because it's not, pumps are powered by electricity. And at this point, the electric grid was not supporting anything. So they get into the car, they leave, they get to this cabin. And this cabin is one room. And they are furious because there's 6 of them. And this is a very small cabin, not room for everybody. And DJ pulls a gun on them at a time when they were not armed. And after this, our correspondent and Tom were armed at all times. Apparently, even when they sleep, because they're not going to be caught flat-footed again. And told them that he and Faith were going to stay there, and the rest of them were to get out. And Heather and Mike did not survive the encounter because they did not care about the gun. They were so furious they attacked anyway. And DJ shot them. The shots, of course, brought zombies. And our correspondent and Tom were on the front porch. Luckily, DJ was a bit of a moron and hadn't taken the keys from Tom. Tom drove them there. So Tom and our correspondent get in the truck, and as they're leaving, DJ and Faith come outside and are yelling at them. Again, apparently DJ, while he wanted to be leader, was not smart to come back with their food, because all of the supplies belonged to them in their mind. Our heroes drive away, but in the rearview mirror, Tom sees that DJ and Faith are attacked by zombies and they go down. So our leader is now Tom. And they decide that as much as this setup was a nice setup, that they do need to be around more people, that they do need to find some place with more survivors. And so they decide to just travel until they find a group. And when they find a group, the dynamic is completely different. Part of being part of the group is everybody contributes in one way or another. And, this group even had a woman who was in a wheelchair, but she still contributed in a lot of different ways. And one of the main ways was morale. This woman in the wheelchair knew so many stories and kept people entertained. If there was anything that needed to be done with organizing the food, making the food, that sort of thing, she contributed. Not all contributions have to be going out into the zombie infested areas to get supplies. Sometimes your contribution is keeping everybody else happy. Sometimes your contribution is taking care of the kids. Sometimes your contribution is being a calming influence on others. And what our correspondent said from this experience is she really thinks that because this friend group was already deeply dysfunctional, and she doesn't give examples of it, she just says that they're deeply dysfunctional, um, and there were already power dynamics at play there, that they were sort of doomed to fail because they had always fought amongst themselves. They had always, just griped at each other, tried to one up each other, those kinds of things. And when they got with their new group, which was much bigger, 6 people versus 20 plus people, those issues weren't apparent because everybody was starting fresh, everybody was starting new, and they were able to meet each other where they were, which was in the zombie apocalypse, which was where survival is much more important than ego. And our correspondent wrote in saying that, once she saw Robert's Rules of Chaos come through, because one of their community members found it at a store and brought it back, she and Tom were both like, yeah, we spent more of our time in the early days fighting amongst ourselves than surviving the threat. And that's why out of the 6 of them, 2 survived, and ego doesn't really have a whole lot of place in the zombie apocalypse. And people still are very ego driven in a lot of different ways, but it frequently does not help with survival if ego is more important to you than fighting off the zombies and surviving as best as you can. So that is a story that we got about the first rule of chaos, and I wanted to share it with you because I think there are a lot of us who in the early days, if I hadn't tried to convince my family to leave the camp, if I had just taken Mitch and left, Mitch would still be alive. You know, I do think I probably would have had a hard time living with myself if I had done that, but I wouldn't have lost Mitch. There would have been some life that still breathed in his body. So I have regrets about allowing the old way of doing things and the old schools of thought dictate my actions when the world had changed. And when the world changes, you have to change with it. So if you are out there and you are with a group that is dysfunctional and ego-driven and prone to infighting, keep yourself safe, stay armed at all times, and maybe keep your eye out for a group that doesn't function through infighting and instead functions through cooperation. And above all else, survive, survive, survive. Robert's Rules of Chaos. Number 1, we are all in this together. Humanity is up against an inhuman foe that outmatches us, one that has wiped us almost to extinction. Worse, in the early days we helped them with the task of our own removal by fighting amongst ourselves, with indecision and infighting. Either these forms of self-defeat are over now, immediately, or humanity is over. Because we're up against an enemy that never fights among themselves, that never competes against their own kind to the detriment of their group. We're against an enemy so united in their purpose that they may as well be different fingers on the same dark hand, and humanity needs to match that unity. Every human is your ally. Every human needs your help and protection. Every human needs to help and protect you, or we all die. This does not mean that we need to be foolish. There will be some humans who don't get this message, who reject it, and we need to be wary. We meet strangers with an open hand because we are all in this together, and with a gun in case the strangers don't know it. We are all in this together.